Hey Deepa, so good to hear you.
Good
Um,
morning. Good morning, Gaurav. It's a pleasure every time to talk to you.
Pleasure is all mine, Deepa, and as I told you earlier, always a pleasure connecting with you and finding somebody walking on the similar path in some other part of the world and exchanging notes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It takes one to recognize one.
Absolutely, yes. How is family doing?
Well, it's springtime here, and it's a very sunny day here in France. And for me, spring is a representation of something new that is born. And as something new gets born, I also truly believe that something has to die. And we all go through these cycles and phases in life. And today I'm sitting here with this question, uh, what needs to die in me? What needs to die today so that something new can be born?
Yeah, this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes: the act of creation begins with the act of destruction. And I remember one of my teachers asking me this question, Gaurav, what do you need to kill with them to give birth to a new self? So, with that, Deepa, thank you so much for starting this conversation from that note. So, let's dig deeper. Would love to understand your life, would love to know you a little better. So, if I may request you to share an episode from your life that brings a smile on your face today as well.
There's so many episodes in my life that could bring a smile on my face. I'm ever grateful for the journey, for the path that I walked, and for the people I met. But there's one thing that really warms my heart. It warms my heart and it makes my eyes go mellow and my eyes just soften up. And this is when I bring to mind my meeting with Mother Teresa that I was so blessed to have. I was so blessed to have this because I was one of those kids in class who was talking too much and I was punished and sent outside my class in Chandigarh, which is where I studied, and I was made to sit in this odd position outside the class because I was talking too much. And I saw two sisters walk by, Mother Teresa and the school principal. So I stood up in that moment and I can still feel how that corridor felt, that energy of that place. And she said to me, "Why are you outside?" And I told her. And immediately after, I felt her soft hands on my head. And she said, "God bless you, my child. You should be allowed to go inside." At that time, as a child, I was just super happy. And I said, "Oh my God, now I get to go back and sit in my class and be with everybody else." And guess what? I had the chance and I was lucky enough to meet Mother Teresa, and I was lucky enough to meet the school principal who said, "Hey, I don't need to sit outside." And, it was like a wink to my teacher and say, "I'm back." Right. But then that, that meeting, it laid a seed. It laid a seed for compassion. It laid a seed for forgiveness. And it laid a seed for compassion and forgiveness, not only to myself, but also to those who discriminate and those who make me angry and trigger me in a moment. And that is the hardest part.
Thank you, Deepa, for bringing that. And what I'm listening is that being human is the hardest part, isn't it? Because on one hand, you're talking about compassion, you're talking about forgiveness. And I'm sure meeting somebody like Mother Teresa, why somebody like Mother Teresa? I said, meeting Mother Teresa would have given a different meaning to your life. And as you said, those two words came alive like never before. How do you use those two learnings, those two values in your life today as well?
Now, there are different situations. I can talk about one situation. I can talk about one situation that I had a couple of years ago where I was in this meeting where I had prepared for that project for like about 6 months. And we had a meeting with a client. And this meeting was actually to decide who's going to go and make the presentation to the client. And in that meeting, I was told off that it's not going to be me. And for me, it was a no brainer because I'd worked on the project for 6 months and I was working in this company in France where I spoke English. And so it was just no doubt. So it wasn't that moment where I wasn't chosen and it was kind of obvious to everybody else. And it was obvious to me that I wasn't chosen because either I'm a woman or either because I'm brown or whatever reason. They chose a man, they chose of somebody French, even though it was to be done in English. Now, it kind of felt obvious what was going on. Now, that compassion and that forgiveness was immediately present. But that compassion and that forgiveness also took away a voice within me to stand up for my values. And I remained silent. And I wasn't compassionate with myself. Because if I had been compassionate with myself, then I would have spoken up because I would have valued who I am, what I bring. And so compassion is a two-way street. It starts with you, but very often we start with the others. It's easy to serve others than to serve yourself.
It's so beautiful, Deepa. As I'm just listening to you, of course, the words forgiveness and compassion came so alive for me. But at the same time, I'm still left with one question. How do you ensure that you live from a space of compassion and forgiveness and yet don't compromise on your values, don't compromise on your rights? And I'm also thinking how different people would have managed, different leaders would have managed worldwide. People like Nelson Mandela, people like Mahatma Gandhi, who chose not to compromise on their core values and yet live their life from a space of compassion and forgiveness.
So let me tell you, go back a little bit. So what happened right after that incident was, like few weeks and a few months passed by, and I literally felt that I wasn't being valued for what I bring, right? And I wasn't bringing out my potential. And so I remember there was just one day, and this is an accumulation of things. And there was this one day where I was walking into the office, and I remember still the doors of the office when I walk in just felt like iron doors. And pushed through that. And this was a kind of an illusion. And there was this long corridor with rooms on both sides. And I turned and looked into one room. I saw people sitting, and I saw people sitting on toilet seats. Now, it was my imagination that was perhaps running wild. Of course, people were not sitting on toilet seats, but in that moment, that's how it was. And so I said, "What's happening?" And I turned and I looked at the other room and I said, "This is what I see." And then I said, "This is what people are doing to me here." And I just touched my face and I was sweating. I immediately ran to the restroom, washed my face. And that's when the awakening came from that deep hurt and the deep pain of not being valued, not being identified for what I can bring. That's when the warrior in me was evoked. So, xMonks, you talk about the inner warrior. And you asked the question to me before in our conversation, Deepa, when did that warrior in you get installed? And there were several moments in life, there was not just one. So every time we are hurt, every time we experience pain, the warrior, we have a choice. And I say we have a choice to evoke that warrior within us. Or we have a choice to play by the rules and play a cat on the wall and allow the situation and allow the universe to decide for us. And if we do that, then we choose to be in harmony and we choose to play safe, but we choose not to stand up for ourselves.
You won't believe that, Deepa, but yesterday I was talking to one of my teachers and we were discussing that how all of us have a very basic need of a need to be heard, a need to be seen, and a sense of belongingness. Now, as I'm just listening to you, as you mentioned that I did not feel valued, somehow I could experience that in my body. I experienced the same emotion that I experienced yesterday when we were discussing not being seen, not being heard. In that moment when you felt that you're not being valued, what happened? What shifted for you?
What shifted for me was it was okay to say that I don't belong to this tribe. That sense, like you rightly mentioned, we play by the rules because we want to belong. Love and belonging is what we search for all the time. When we choose to be different, when you choose to play a different game, you are going to lose people along the way. When you choose to get out of your comfort zone and protect your chateau and protect your castle and protect your potential and that evolutionary potential that exists within you, that is when you're going to create a way for yourself. And as you create a new way for yourself, you're going to lose people along the way. That is for sure.
Mm,
Because you trigger something in them.
mm. So that's the professional side of your life, right? I'm just wondering if you've ever felt similar or if you've felt suffocated in your personal life as well when you decided to be a warrior, when you decided to be a fighter.
Was there a moment? Yes, there was. There was a moment where I decided to be that warrior, but it didn't come immediately. It took time. It takes time for the warrior to step out. And this happened when I was going through a divorce in India. But at that time, it was a taboo, it was not done. And I changed 6 to 7 lawyers, I lost count. And unfortunately, the first 6 of them were women. It wasn't that they were women that they didn't support me, but there was something that was common is that this is unacceptable. We're not going to fight like hell for you, Deepa. We're going to advise you to go back. We'll be your lawyer, but we'll help you. But it's just going to be hard for your situation. It's not going to be easy. You can't get it.
Hmm,
And then I decided every time to walk out to find someone new, to find someone new. But it was not a lonely game because I had support from my parents and I had support from my own value base. I knew what I was fighting for. I knew what kind of justice and what values and the kind of life I wanted to live and what I wanted to stand up for. And I wanted to stand up for myself. And so in that journey, I found a lawyer, a man for whom I have huge respect and huge gratitude. And he said to me, "You caught the tiger's tail. You either learn to ride it or you will be swung around."
wow.
And that is when I realized I was playing a cat on the wall because I just wanted to be accepted by everybody else. I
Hmm,
wanted to play a game where I'm not seen. It's because the minute you step outside what is not the done thing, you're going to be seen.
hmm,
And you don't want to be seen. Somehow, as children, we're kind of educated to play soft, to not show yourself out loud. And that socialized frame keeps running us for a long time. And so it was that was running me. And that's when I decided, okay, now I need to step up. I need to bring out that warrior in me. And that's when the whole game changed.
hmm. Tell me more about the husband. What game was he playing? What was he asking for that you were not okay with? How was he showing up that made you realize that somewhere your values were getting compromised when you took charge of the warrior in you?
Well, it's a very delicate question to answer. And we all have certain aspirations and certain dreams of how life should be and how life should not be. And simple differences, which can happen in any relationship, is what came about. And that is exactly where I chose that I'm actually wanting to live a life of my own aspirations and not someone else's aspirations.
Hmm.
So it might be something small, a small cause that you're fighting for, or it might be something very big that you're fighting for. The level of injustice is not what makes the difference.
Hmm.
The question is, what are your boundaries? What's okay and what's not okay? And how do you define that in your
Hmm.
life? What is your level of
Beautiful.
tolerance?
Interestingly, I come across so many women who are doing extremely well in their corporate career, and yet they're not happy on the personal front. And yet there's so much of fear that they carry with themselves, despite the fact that they're living with so much of resentment. And yet they don't take the first step. So if you were to hold the space for them and tell them or give them a piece of advice here, what are the things that they need to look at before they take any decision? What is the measure of the tolerance that they should look for?
I think everybody's definition of tolerance zone is completely different. The level at which I stepped outside my comfort zone is completely different from what is comfort zone for someone else, right? What is a stretch is different. And you've got to decide there how. I don't think, sorry, let me back up. I don't think you will ever know how much you're capable of until you're in it. I had no clue how life would turn up. I had no clue how much risks I would be taking and where that lead me to. But when you're in the situation, you've got to trust yourself that you have all the resources within you to actually come up strongly. It's our fear that holds us back.
Hmm.
Why don't we set boundaries? Do you know why people don't set boundaries? We all don't set boundaries. I never used to set boundaries. Why other people? Let me talk about myself. I never used to set boundaries because I was afraid that people will dislike me. I was afraid that the project might stop. I was afraid that the relationship might come to an end. And it was my fear. But the minute I went and tested and I saw that, okay, if I do set my boundaries, yes, it makes the other people upset. But in the long run, it brings you back much more respect.
And I think in long run, it's good for both the parties involved. In my mind, you're not only talking about the physical boundaries, you're talking about emotional boundaries, you're talking about psychological boundaries. Tell me more about the boundaries that you're speaking about in a relationship. And despite any relationship that we are a part of, why is it important for an individual to set the boundaries for each other so that we can bring in more love, we can bring in more respect, trust, and acceptance for each other?
This is exactly what I talk about. Like I created this whole journey. Like, I'm an engineer. Like I became a coach, but I'm an engineer. And I was raised by a dad who was a scientist, right? And so I have this very logical and brain. And I, give everything that I learned in coaching, I went and put it down PowerPoint presentation and slides and put a methodology to it. So this is me. So someone who likes to put in place methodology, someone who likes to put in place frameworks. And this is exactly one of the frameworks in the work that I do is asking people like what is like defining for people what is their core driver. You need to understand what are your core driver. Very often we get onto goals like what are your goals, what's your 5-year plan, what's your 3-year plan, but the goals is like the tip of the surface, right? And below that is the whole person and the whole character beneath, and you need to understand like what are the core drivers that are driving a person and how is this person made of like connecting all the dots there. And from there you can like define like what are your principles. And this is work, this is inner work where you start to define what are those principles, and then it gets easier. Like, I show up in meetings and I say, hey, listen, if this makes you unhappy, I'm happy if you say it, but please don't roll your eyes. And that's a boundary.
This reminds me almost like 8 to 10 years, I was coaching a friend of mine and his wife for the relationship and how they came together to set a boundary for themselves that uh, husband is not allowed to raise the voice and the woman was not allowed to leave the room without saying anything. And they started fighting with each other. How dare you to raise your voice? My dad has never raised the voice for my mother. How dare you to do this? And how dare you to leave the room? My mom has never left the room while my dad is talking. So, how this is so interesting that all of us come from our own assumptions and beliefs in the past and the prejudices, and we try to put the present tense in the mold that we have been holding on to for the longest period of time. So, thank you for shedding some light on the boundaries and how it's so important to draw those boundaries for our own selves and for the person that we are talking to. So, coming back to your journey, the personal journey that you spoke about, that how we should not compromise on our values, and it's important to value our own aspirations in a relationship. Deepa, what I'm aware of it, that when you were going through that experience in your life, you were mentioned in the newspapers as well. And what I know is that was very tragic and terrifying for you. So, on one hand, you had to take care of your parents. On the other hand, you had Mr. So and so to deal with. And then you were dealing with the lawyers and the policemen as well. It's not easy, I'm sure. How did you manage to hold that mental space for yourself and hold on to that emotional grit which is required to be the tough nut on the outside and yet hold that daughter space for your parents?
I think it is a sense of clarity. It's a sense of clarity on what are, and I'm going back again, what are my values? What are my principles? And that's it. It's just very simple. There's just one or two things that just guide you. And that just becomes your guiding light. Yeah. And you can ask yourself the question, who am I to stand up for this value? Or you can ask yourself the question, who am I not to? And I realized for me in that moment, what kept me peace, I wasn't frustrated. I can tell you that much. I was calm. Now, when I think back, I'm like, where did that level of calmness come from? Where did that sense of inner peace come from? And it's that when you are very clear in yourself about what are some key values, core values for yourself, it just becomes very easy. And then you get unattached to the result. The whole point of disappointment and frustration is when we hold on to the results and we say, we want it to work in this way. I had a plan. I'm going to do this, and this is how I want the outcome to be. And when things don't happen that way, disappointment, frustration, anger, all these things just creep in so easily. And then, I know you can ask me this question, like, so how do you remain unattached, right? For me, I'm as an engineer, right? And so for me, it's like everything is like a process and a methodology. And so the process of like being unattached for me is I ask myself this very simple question. This is what I ask my clients every single time is like, what are you meant to learn in this journey, in this phase of life? What is the learning here for you? And what is the impact that you're creating for yourself and for everybody else around you? And when I talk about impact, it's about you taking responsibility for that impact and for the mess that you create for everybody else around you.
That's being conscious.
Absolutely.
Hmm, so beautiful.
You're an inspiration, right? Anything you do, the minute you stand up for your values, you inspire everybody else to do the same.
Hmm. Absolutely. If it's not alignment to what I stand for,
Mm.
then I can fall for anything.
A lot of if you had asked me this question about values and all that 20 years ago, or when I was a software engineer, I would have said, what is that vocabulary? What is that word? And so for like people who are like not coaches who are listening to this episode, like, you know, what are values and how do you define values, Gaurav?
Hmm. I define values. It's a shortcut way of defining what is important to us. They are energetic drivers that define my aspiration and my intentions. And yeah, it drives anything that I do or anything that I avoid. So, yeah. How do you define values?
So, a value for me, a key value, let me give an example. A key value for me is personal fulfillment. And another key value for me is freedom. And freedom is freedom of expression. Freedom is freedom to make choices and freedom to be my own boss. This is how I define freedom. So we all have different notions of how we define that word. You might have a different way of defining freedom. We might
Mm.
say that, okay, we have the same value base, but it's just different. And this is where we need to look at how do we operationalize that value and that behavior? What does that look like in the way I show up at work, in the way I show up in my relationship? And that's when you can actually define your boundaries. So, you know, life just gets easier when you do a little bit of that inner work because you not only bring clarity for yourself, you also bring clarity for everybody else around you.
Precisely. Precisely. And it's very easy said than done, Deepa. I can tell you this because I come across so many people who are struggling, not because the life has been unfair to them, not because the world has been tough to them. They are struggling because they are choosing not to live their life from a space of self awareness. And while I was listening to you when you spoke about freedom, in fact, for the last couple of quarters, I've been contemplating if I were to write a book on the three most important questions, what would I include there? So I spoke about the first question is what matters in life, and that's what you spoke about. That what's the cause that you're willing to stand for? The second one is who am I? And the third one is how can I live my life from a space of freedom everywhere and anytime? And as I'm just listening to you, it's only validating that all these three questions are really important. Now, Deepa, as I'm just listening to you, you spoke about your parents, right? You also spoke about the support that you got from them. If you can help me understand, what was that moment or what was that interaction with your parent that gave you all the courage, that gave you fuel to fuel the warrior inside you, where you said that they have my back. Let me just face the fire right now. Let me just face the heat right now.
You know, the interaction is actually very cultural. It is how you make meaning of what you see. Now, uh, how people express love is different, but you can feel that. Yeah. And when you know that you feel loved, despite whatever, it is just expressed in different ways and forms in different families and different relationships. Doesn't need to be said.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing this. And as I'm just listening to you, I'm revisiting what's my mother's ways of expressing love and care. What's my brother's way of expressing that he has my back and he's there to support me? How does my sister support me? How does she care for me? So, Deepa, help me understand during this complete journey that you've gone through, how is Deepa of that era different from Deepa, who's a very established coach, an established entrepreneur, who's traveling the world, who's happily married, who's living a life from a space of freedom? So, what difference do you see that's remarkable for you that you're really proud of?
It's funny because it immediately goes back to I remember I quit a job in a company that I was working for in France. And I stepped outside because I said, I want to have the freedom of being my own boss. And at the same time, I wanted to define my own terms of working. And I decided to create my company, decided to become a coach. I decided to do, the business that I'm running. in a country where I didn't speak the language. Yeah. And this is where you would ask the question, like, how? Everybody would ask the question, how would you do that? Like, how would you set up a company in a country where you don't speak the language and do business there? And this is exactly where I decided that I'm going to focus on the value that I bring and the impact that I can create. And what is that space where I can do that? So I started working with extremely senior leaders who spoke English in international sectors. And boom, life went skyrocketing from driving a broken car to driving um, to driving an expensive car. Now it's not about it's not about the status symbol, but it's life just happens and comes by when you focus on the impact that you can create for the world around you. And so, if there's one thing that I'm really proud of, is you can create from nothing. And you've got to trust that ability that you can create from nothing. And that is one thing that I've learned.
I think for me, this would be the sentence of this episode, that you have to trust that you can create from nothing. You can create everything from a space of shunya. It's not at all about status, as you mentioned. It's about trusting yourself that you can create from nothing. So, Deepa, what do you think? What are those traits in you that helped you to create everything from nothing?
I don't like this trait, but I don't give up. And I'll tell you, I don't like it because sometimes, you need to ask yourself the question, like something needs to come to an end. Something needs to, and so my level of tolerance is extremely high. So that's what I see. So I think some of the traits that I have are persistence.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. And a zest for learning. I love learning. And I
mm.
think if you're in this field of coaching and people development, learning is our alibi. I think I can learn for another 600 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Deepa, you started this company called Meet My Potential. So, tell me the story behind this name. Why Meet My Potential? And what was the inspiration for you to get it going?
So it's a very good question. And why now? I don't think I would have created Meet My Potential before, 10 years ago. Meet My Potential is all about coming back home to yourself. When you're born, you study, you get educated, you get a degree, you have aspirations to have a certain job, to reach a certain position, to be something, to be someone, to get somewhere. And there comes this point in life where becomes a complete U-turn. Becomes a complete U-turn. That is, I go back to that child that was born on the very first day, because that potential, you ask me, what are your characteristics? What is it that defines you? That definition of persistence, I bet it was there from the day one that I was born, right? So we all have a certain potential within us. We go seeking outside of us and looking for evidence to actually prove that potential outside of us and reinforce that back to ourselves. But Meet My Potential is all about, it's not about reaching potential. It's about meeting that potential that exists within you by removing those layers of cobwebs. And I say layers of cobwebs because it's like the image that I have is like you standing in front of the mirror, but you really can't see yourself. You really can't see the potential that exists in you because there's like so much dust and cobwebs that's around that mirror. And so, meeting my potential is the work that we do to remove those layers of cobwebs so that you can see what really shines and exists within you.
Thank you. And Deepa, as you're talking about meeting your potential, how do you see yourself evolving on this path?
I had no clue that 10 years ago I'm going to be doing this podcast with you. No clue that I'm going to be talking about all the things we spoke about. So, whoever knows what's in store for us, But that question, just holding that question, who am I becoming, is the most important question. I can't see who am I becoming. But the minute I'm open to holding that question, I have some ideas. I have a certain vision. I have some glimpses of images that show up. They're not yet fully formed, but they are there.
Okay. And as you're just reflecting, so because we spoke about your past, we spoke about where you are right now, we spoke about how do you see yourself evolving. Let's say now, if you were to give a piece of advice to your younger self, that would have changed the game for you, that would have given you even deeper insights about life, about yourself, about the world, what advice would you give to yourself?
I would say get on the path of self development as early as you can in your life. And I think this should actually become something that's done in grad school.
Yeah, get onto the path of self development and self awareness for sure. I think one of the gifts that you can offer to anyone is the gift of awareness. And I think we all are blessed by the virtue of what we do, who we are for our living as well. And that's where, in fact, we were talking about that in our life, there's nothing called work. We just do something that we are really passionate about. So, Deepa, as you just reflect in your life, as what do you know for sure with 100% certainty and surety?
I'm very clear about one thing. One thing that I know for myself is I'm going to be in the space of serving others. Being of service is is the most important aspect of my life. Helping, healing, these are things that I will always continue to do in one shape, form, or the other.
So, thank you so much, Deepa. I think the journey that you started with forgiveness and compassion, and where you are right now, where you're talking about serving others, being a healer, and the warrior you are, I think your life is definitely worth making a movie on. And I'm sure someday we'll see a biopic on you where we'll talk about a journey from somebody who has lived a life from a space of compassion, forgiveness, healing, uh, and service for others. So thank you so much for the inspiration that you are, Deepa. Always a pleasure talking to you. There's so much to learn from you. There's so much to get inspired from you. So I'm looking forward to our interactions as we walk this path called life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gaurav, for your very intriguing and interesting questions. They always evoke lots of thoughts. Thanks so much.
Shukran. Thank you so much. And I look forward to interact with you yet again. Bye bye.